Hi, and thanks for joining everyone. Let's start our session today with a bit of a recap on what we've discussed in, Learning Outcome 2, Part 1 yesterday. So what I would want to do is basically look at a quick bit of, recapping. So I've opened the unit specification. We are covering the organization behavior as a unit. And what we've covered so far in this particular unit is to understand, why is organization behavior important, to study in particular the behavior, attitude, and look at how people behave in the organization, business entity when they are given jobs, responsibilities, and essentially looking at the whole idea of working under supervised conditions. So when I say organization behavior, what I would typically mean by that is that we are looking at the academic study of, how people interact in groups. And here it is important, as I mentioned earlier, that, this particular subject is a combination of a lot of different subjects. So it includes psychology, it includes management, it includes some part of leadership. And then there are bits and pieces that we will study in terms of key frameworks, models, which are primarily related to motivation and job, performance, and then to a certain extent, even leadership and management related, fields. Now, why is this subject quite important to study? It is quite important to study is because when we work in groups and we work within, teams within an organization, it is important for us to understand how people interact in groups and what, kind of makes them work or, show a particular behavior, and what demotivates them or, for example, does not make them do a particular type of work because in some cases, the conditions and, the resources being provided are not adequate enough and are not, congenial enough for this person to be able to work within that environment. So this study, which is primarily related to the behavior of individuals, of how they would behave in and, essentially work within an environment wherein there are some principles and guidelines laid down by employers, and the area wherein, certain factors, both internal and external, would essentially be affecting them in terms of how they produce output for the organization or a business. Now, some part of this study is embedded from the point of view of into, I would say, human resources management. It also would look at things related to motivation. That is what we've covered in Learning Outcome 1. And also to understand, what are the various approaches through which people understand and, put. When I say put, I mean they essentially group people together to be able to work together in teams to achieve larger objectives set by the organization or the management. In Learning Outcome 2, we essentially looked at going into detail to understand, the motivation theories. And because there are lots of motivation theories and a lot of work has been done by different psychologists, scientists over the years, decades. So what we did in that learning outcome is to basically classify and categorize the theories into two types: content theories and process theories. So when we look at content theories, we looked at main theories of ATHE, we looked at Herzberg's, Maslow's theory, McLaughlin's theory. And then when we look at process theories, we were focused on, understanding Latham's, Potter's, and Adams, model. Now, both these theories essentially are important because when I talk about content theories, one of the key differentiation of content theories was that here, these theories typically argue that direct and sustained behavior of individuals towards, certain types of jobs or responsibilities which is given may not happen if their needs are not met. And we took the example of Maslow's model here, which is very similar to the ATHE model, wherein he categorized the 5 basic needs of Maslow's into 3. Then we looked at the 2-factor theory of Herzberg, and essentially the McLaughlin's theory, which was primarily hygiene factors and, unhygiene factors. Now here, what we generally tend to see is that people are motivated by the process of, getting, say, for example, in this case, when we talk about content theories in particular, we basically looked at summarizing the work into a type wherein we see the focus is primarily on group of people, how they have different needs, and to identify their needs to be able to get the work done. On the other hand, when we talk about process theories, we looked at these theories which are work in this category is being done by various, again, psychologists, where the main focus of the theory is looking at how do we let's say how do we look at, for example, look at the process through which we can influence people working within a group or a team. And here, instead of focusing on people's need, the focus is on psychological and behavioral processes of the individual. And to understand them allows the managers or leaders to essentially then keep or create incentives in a way which allows them to motivate the individuals to do the job. Now, by understanding these theories, we are able to understand the actions and interactions and the context in which how employees can be motivated to work within the organization. That was the most important inference that we drew when we talk about, process and content-based motivation theories. We looked at very briefly the concept of intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Now, intrinsic motivation is something which is defined when you are looking at doing things and it is being done for your own satisfaction. So here the person would act just because they feel that doing this activity is going to be something which is fun or challenging for their own point of view. And that is where we generally see that people are motivated to do or carry out those activities. And hence, we would say intrinsic or internal, in a way, motivation, wherein we say people are self-motivated or, they are motivated enough to be able to carry on and do the jobs. Extrinsic motivation tends to be motivation which is in which the employees would like to participate, but they would want to participate using their cognitive abilities. Now, when I look at cognitive abilities, what I mean by that is they feel that let's put it this way, they want to be involved in the decision-making process. And that is where they would want to use their experience, their academic rigor, their, let's say, their skills that they've gained over the years. And in doing so, they feel important, that the job that they're doing is in which they are performing or they are participating, they feel they are involved, and obviously they feel empowered. And that is where, the reason of, say, extrinsic motivation comes in. Now, here, this is related to a type of conditioning, which would primarily be that if we want to get people to participate in the decision-making process, then their behavior can be essentially modified by, allowing them or creating, let's say, rewards and punishments, which would be essentially bringing out specific behaviors. And this could be in the sense that when we look at talking about extrinsic motivation in particular, they could be driven by external rewards. So these could be tangible rewards like money, incentives, for example, trips, holidays, and that would mean that, okay, doing this, they get larger share of, let's say, decision-making process, and also at the end of it, they get rewarded. And that is where these extrinsic would mean external factors which can motivate individuals. Now, in the second part today, what we want to be able to look at is from what we've understood in terms of the motivation theories, we want to look at the application of some of these motivation theories to see how actually they tend to work within the organization. So we're going to pick off, from where we left yesterday in terms of our discussions using the PowerPoint presentation. And here is where what I would suggest is that when we talk about people being generally motivated or show that they have a high self-esteem, they are, self-motivated and they are enthusiastic, you would generally see those employees would show higher motivation than, other employees which are not self-motivated or enthusiastic or proactive in the organization. And in those cases, you would see the difference between the two, which is how they are highlighted. And some of these are then picked up by managers. So when I say characteristics and behaviors of employee which demonstrate low or high motivation. Some of them who are demonstrating or showing low motivation, sometimes you'll get to see that in the organization, because the people will lack enthusiasm, they will have low productivity, they will not be forthcoming in taking initiatives, they will have maybe poor time management or poor attendance within the organization, and punctuality in terms of attending meetings, or say attending to tasks, would have to be reminded. And this tends to be even true for the fact that sometimes they arrive late to the office, and they would not be considered, they would basically be not motivated to participate in an activity, because because of various reasons. It could be that the job is not good, it could be that the motivation for them to work within the job role is not enough in terms of pay, in terms of rewards, in terms of recognition. And last but not the least, sometimes you would generally see in certain circumstances, some of these employees could also show a negative attitude, and these are the characteristics that we get to see of people who are suffering with low morale, and obviously are less motivated, or being reactive rather than being proactive in their job roles. And that is where managers pick up the sign that, okay, they can say, and they essentially pick up these signs to say that the person has low motivation. And that is where performance appraisals and reviews, which tend to happen with the people within the organization, are looking at changing some of these aspects to see what motivates the employee. Is it a job rotation that has to be done? Is this because of low empowerment in terms of the job role, or the activities that the people carry out on a day-to-day basis? It could be because of reasons wherein they feel that they are not enough, they are not rewarded enough, they are not praised enough, or the work that they do is not brought to light or highlighted to management. And these could be all such reasons wherein you generally feel people are showing low motivation. On the other hand, if we look at employees which show high motivation, you would generally see that these employees are going to be more extroverts. They're going to be more enthusiastic in terms of their engagement with other colleagues within the organization. You generally see that the work gets done. They need very little supervision because of the fact that they are self-motivated. They are proactive in their approach. They will come out with innovative ideas and solutions to problems. They would be forthcoming. You would generally see the productivity is good in terms of finishing the work. And in some cases, you would generally see their attendance and punctuality is consistently meeting the guidelines set by the HR within the organization, and they generally have a positive attitude. So it's the exact opposite of what you get to see when people are suffering with low morale and are not motivated enough to work within a particular job role. Here, people would be challenged, and obviously they feel challenged, and that is why they look at taking up challenges. And obviously, because of the fitment in the role with the organization, and they are generally performing well, and they get all the resources. Maybe they get praise from the management, they're getting rewards, they're being adequately sourced in terms of being provided resources. That is where you will generally see that these employees tend to be, or part of these signs that we pick up as managers tend to be, that these people are motivated and they are performing well in their job roles. Now, the main part that we want to understand is, how do we look at motivation theories in the aspect of designing work? Now, when I say work or design of work, what I mean by that is, sometimes you look at when managers sit down with their subordinates or their colleagues or people who they supervise. One of the key things that they look at in terms of working towards for a yearly, let's say, target, or for example, taking somebody on new in the department, they spend a lot of time in terms of creating what is called a job design and a job description. Now, when we look at something like a job design, what we are essentially meaning by that is that in most cases, managers will take a lot of interest in creating, the description of the role, which would be, I would say, optimum for the person to be able to come in and perform. That means they would be more interested in, the process of establishing what could be the roles and responsibilities which the individual will take or come in and do in that particular role. They will also be looking at the system and procedures which they need to follow. And then the main purpose of in getting themselves involved in the creation of that job description, which is essentially the process of job design, is to coordinate and ensure that the role and the roles and responsibilities, the creation of that role and the roles and responsibilities which the individuals do in that job when they start or when they join, are going to be optimized and are working towards creating value and maximizing performance for their department or for the role that they have been given. So in this case, you would generally see that when we talk to managers in particular, and then they look at essentially creating, for example, a job design, they would be looking at the tasks in terms of roles and responsibilities which are specifically required for the purposes of making sure that they are set and they are optimized for the individual to come in and essentially then perform in that particular role. Now, one of the questions which I would get asked is that, is there a standardized framework, for creating job design or a job description? Now, when we look at job design and job description, and we look at some sort of a standardized framework, generally speaking, most organizations would have something which is prevalent or has been created within their own setup, which tends to meet their requirements. Now, when we look at, say, the case of a job design in particular, there is a way that organizations can standardize on this particular, let's say the framework, and all such job descriptions would be created whichever role they are, whether it's in junior management, senior management, middle management. They would all be looking at, effectively following the principles which are designed and agreed on with the HR management or HR of the company to help, implement that across all the job roles which individuals would take up within the organization. Now, when I talk about a standardized framework, this could be maybe a framework which is specific to an organization. It could be something which has been adapted, by involving consultants, or essentially making sure that when managers look at job description, they have certain standard parts in that job description. For example, the job description would have some basic requirements in terms of eligibility criteria. So, for example, academic qualifications, they might have certain requirements of, say, communication skills, language, and some part of minimum experience which is required to step into that role. And that would form, the base minimum framework which could be meeting the organizational criteria. Now, when it comes to the job role, here the job role could be, created by the department head or the manager who is going to be taking on that new employee. And in this case, the job role essentially would be, I would put it this way, a combination of some of the characteristics which are related to the role in terms of day-to-day operation, and to a certain extent, strategic part which is required to be done in order to fulfill, and meet the expectations set for performance within that role. And a simple example of that, which I would give you, is when I talk about, say, a job description for, let's say a customer services executive. And if I look at the job description for a customer services executive, what I would look at is, when I look at job design, and within the job design, I will go into the principles of effective job design. I would look at how the job is evolving within the organization. I would also look into the fact that what is the role of that particular job, or what is the job role which the individual is going to come in and take, and where the fitment happens within the organization, and how at the end of the year the job would be assessed in terms of the responsibilities executed by the individual will be assessed for the purposes of some sort of an appraisal. And this would be a part and parcel of looking at, the standardized framework. So if somebody is to talk about job design and job description, we would go through this particular process wherein we are going to be establishing the roles and responsibilities and the system and procedures that employees are expected to follow. And in following those procedures, the main purpose would be to stick to their job design, to try and coordinate with other individuals who are going to be responsible and working with them as colleagues in order to create value and also to maximize performance for that department or for the particular role which they are coming in to do. Now, when we look at this particular aspect, what we are looking at is we are looking at getting into the aspect of the creation of job design or redesigning, or in terms of, the whole purpose of creating that role. So HR would maybe come up with the strategy that this year, if, for example, and let's look at an example to discuss this, and hopefully that will make it clear. That example, if iPhone is or Apple is going to launch a new phone, and that phone, normally they do launches in September. If they're going to launch a new phone, say iPhone 15, what will happen is the process through which this product launch is going to be put together in September, the scheme of things in terms of actions would have already started within the organization. There would be maybe the marketing team or the business development team would be looking at taking on new people. And in this case, if they decide that we need to have so many new people enrolled or, inducted into the organization, their role in terms of specific role, what they're going to play during the process of this product launch is going to be discussed and then designed by the management. Now, that role will have certain key responsibilities. It will have a location where that role will be based. The management is, going to be responsible for fixing a remuneration or a salary package for that role. They're going to clearly define what are going to be the success parameters to say that if the person is performing well and is meeting this criteria, then what could be those success factors which could be looked at to understand why the individual is essentially performing or not performing. So they would be defined, and all this definition in terms of the creation would essentially happen within the job design, which is being done when the role requirement actually comes up. So here the aspect of looking at job design would become most important, because this is going to align with the strategy of the management at Apple, the top management at Apple, to make the launch of the iPhone 15 a success. So they would be looking at creating this job description through the process of designing this role, and they would define some of the key parameters which are required to be included or considered when this particular job description or the job role essentially gets created before it is advertised or put out in the market to advertising agencies or recruitment agencies. Now, within the job design, you would also have what is called goal setting. And this is where we are going to be dipping back into what is called the goal setting theory. If you remember what we discussed in terms of the goal setting theory of motivation, which was the Locke's and Latham's theory. And here the idea of the goal setting theory of motivation was essentially looking into that why, if you remember, they identified 5 elements in the goal setting theory. And these 5 elements that, Edwin Locke and Latham actually identified were primarily the 5 basic bits which the management would look at as qualities within the person joining this role. And these would essentially be, forming the key bits which they would look at in CVs when, candidates apply. So these 5 principles were clarity, challenge, commitment, feedback, and, task complexity. So the individual that they're going to hire is going to be hired basis these 5 basic qualities that they would want the individual to have from prior work experience, or say, for example, in terms of previously working in a similar role. They would want the person to understand and have clarity in terms of what role they are coming into, the challenge that role poses to them in terms of, the launch of the new product, in this case, the iPhone 15 in a new market, for example, they would need to see commitment and the commitment would come in from similar successes which the individual has enjoyed in the previous roles or in his previous experience, and the task in terms of how they have completed and achieved those similar product launches or launch of a new product in a new market would be essentially required in the goal setting. And this is the part on which they will be rewarded or incentivized towards the end of the year when performance appraisals happen. So the management would need to do a balancing act to make sure that when they consider these 5 principles of goal setting, using, say, for example, in this case, Edwin Locke's and Latham's theory, they would want these goals to be measurable. They would want these goals to be a bit stretched. That means they would want it not to be too easy, but they would want it to be stretched, but at the same time achievable. Otherwise, it will lead to demotivation. And the person would say, no, this is not something that can be achieved. So if they launch a new iPhone 15, say, for example, in a new market, I would say they launch it in a country like, say, Jamaica, just picking it out of the thin air. And they say that this year's target when we launch it would be 5 million phones. And if the market itself is not 5 million for the smartphones in that country, how can the individual join or a group of individuals join and achieve that target? So that would lead to demotivation. So here, the goal setting theory comes in, wherein the management looks at setting the goals which could be realistic. They could be stretch goals, but they are still achievable at the end of the day, and that would allow the individual to be successful and would be looking at individual being motivated in that job role. Now, when we talk about the concept of job enrichment in particular, and we look at the definition of job enrichment basically looks at it gives employees greater responsibility by increasing the range and complexity of tasks which they are required to do. Now, job enrichment is a process which is a part of motivation and is a method which is employed by managers, wherein what they want to do is they want to design the job in such a way that the job is interesting yet challenging, and it requires the individual to use its existing skill set and the past experience. And if they are able to bring that to work and put it into practice and help achieve the objectives, then in that case, there would be suitable rewards which the management would put in place, and they would allow the employee to have greater responsibility, but thereby increasing the chances of them achieving that task. And that is where there would be incentives or rewards associated in creating or in allowing for this higher empowerment within the role. Now, job enrichment here would refer to or draw inferences from 2 theories that we have read in terms of the Herzberg 2-factor theory in particular. And then when we look at, Maslow's theory of hierarchy of needs. So here, job enrichment would mean that you have hygiene factors and you have 9 hygiene factors. Factors means that you have providing conditions, resources, which are conducive for the employee to be able to, perform well in that role, and you're doing away with things which are going to be unhygienic or something which are going to be more demotivating or more, create distrust or discomfort in the role. So essentially, the organization's role here would be to maximize, what are called hygiene factors, which is to say they are going to increase, or motivators essentially, which is going to increase motivation for the individual to perform in that role. And as a process, when we look at job enrichment, generally an example here would be that you manage, for example, say the recruitment process of the college as an example. But in addition to that, because you've been doing quite well in managing the recruitment of the recruitment process of the college, what you're also then given is an additional charge to manage international recruitment for the college. You might be just recruiting for locally, but because you've been doing so quite well for a number of years, and what the company feels is that they need to give you more responsibility or greater responsibility. So in this case, what they will do is add to your job role something which is similar that you're already doing, and you could use your skills and your experience there to take up a slight bit of larger role and that would be within the recruitment sphere itself. But they will also add what is called international recruitment to your to your job, and that would be termed as job enrichment. So here they would give you some additional responsibility, and that responsibility still falls within the recruitment role. But in this case, now you're recruiting not just nationally, or maybe adding another country to recruitment. So if you were a recruiter for, say, Americas, but you've also been given recruitment for certain countries in Southern America or South America, and that would be seen as a job enrichment on your role. Now, these are factors through which managers or companies or organizations would be looking at motivating the individual. Now, some of the other factors that you would look at would be autonomy and empowerment. Now, generally speaking, when we look at employees performing well, and we look at they are doing as expected in terms of achieving the goals which are set by management, you would see that one of the additional steps that is taken by the organization or your manager supervisor would be to provide you greater autonomy. That means decision-making power. They would make your role a bit more independent so that there is very little supervision which is required to be done, or you would get maybe an independent portfolio to be able to manage things on your own and have a team that you can manage, and that allows you to perform and achieve larger objectives for the organization or bigger goals for the organization. And there is where we see the self-determination theory, of motivation coming in. So the self-determination theory of motivation, when it comes in, it represents, and gives the, let's say, we'll come to the theory in a second, but what it gives the management is a perspective that it allows them to trust and feel confident in the role that you're performing. And what they do in accordance to that is to take into account the motivation that you are showing to continuously, achieve goals. But along with that, they also value your personality and the experience that you bring in, which then allows them to place more confidence and, let's say, more responsibility with you to be able to perform in that role. And this is where you would see autonomy coming in. So autonomy could be related to, is something which is being given to you because you're competent. It is given to you because you maybe have connections and you have very good relationship skills. You're able to maintain build relationships. And that is where, the management sees this as a positive. And that is why they are looking at giving you more autonomy towards the role that you're, performing. And they also see what is called self-determination. So self-determination is a very important concept in psychology because it helps to understand that whether if the individual is, self-motivated, then given the direction and the resources, the individual would be then able to carry out the functions in an autonomous manner. That means they would need very little supervision. So sometimes when we look at self-determination and look at the example of including self-determination theory here, it tells the employer that the person, because of the enthusiasm, the self-motivation that you have, if you are given more autonomy and more empowerment, you will feel more motivated to take action. And this would allow the organization to achieve bigger outcomes or, achieve bigger goals. And what the organization in this case does is it looks at your intrinsic motivation, which is primarily you doing this job because you like it, and it is something that you are doing it because you feel challenged and you feel that you are in control. So what they are going to do is engage with you in activities and give you more autonomy, give you more empowerment, and that would allow you to play an important role within the organization and thereby achieving larger objectives or goals for the organization. Now, what the organization here does is it also then looks at giving you commensurate rewards. That means if you achieve this, you're going to get rewarded. If you achieve this, you're going to get promoted. If you achieve this, you're going to get, employee stock options. And these kind of roles, and when empowerment and autonomy is given, generally the organization is looking at goals over a longer period of time. So it could be 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year goals. And as you achieve these milestones in reaching these goals, the organization will suitably reward you. And that is where the self-determination theory comes out of, and is put into this particular aspect, because when the psychologist Edward Deci and Richard Ryan actually worked on this theory, they first introduced this idea in 1980s, wherein they said that there is a close link between self-determination and intrinsic motivation when we look at individuals working within the organization. And they developed this theory, which basically suggests that people tend to be driven when they are seeing growth, and they are gaining fulfillment, self-fulfillment out of that growth. And that is the whole essence of the self-determination theory. Now, in addition to this, what we also look at is that when we talk about rewards and recognition, we also talk about the expectancy theory of motivation. Now here, when we talk about the expectancy theory, what we are looking at essentially is that individuals choose their behavior based on what they believe leads to most beneficial outcome. So here you would generally see some individuals are motivated by the fact because they see the expected outcome that the company is going to increase turnover this year, it's going to lead to increased profitability, and as a result of increased profitability, they will get a larger reward or a share of the profits, because that is what is included in their job description. So this theory is dependent on the fact that how much a person places value on what kind of motivation they are receiving. So sometimes you would see that when rewards are set, or when recognition is, rewards and incentives are set within the organization, they are set by HR managers commensurate to the person's capability of achieving those, goals. Sometimes you would see that there are, obviously within the sales team, if I give you an example, there could be 10 or, different hundreds of sales managers, depending on the size and the scale of the organization. But what you would generally see is that the targets set for each of these sales managers within different territories tend to be commensurate to the target which they can achieve. That means the management sees their ability, they know their capability, and they will set a target which will allow them to hit that target. And that is what will determine their motivation, because they know that if we, say, for example, in a particular small country, let's stick to the example of Caribbean, which I've given. So if the new phone model is to be launched in Caribbean and you have 5 or 7 different small countries, here the targets are going to be set which are going to be relative to what can be achieved within that market. And you would generally see deployment of people or managers in that location would be on the basis of their skills and prior experience, because they know how, or the management knows essentially how much they can achieve in that particular market. So the clear example that I would put in this case would be like when sometimes you see when you work within a large organization, for example, Apple, and you're given different roles, you would generally see when you're given a role to manage a country, for example, they would look at your previous capability, your past experience, your skill set, your ability to be able to manage team and build relationships, and then would give you the next challenge. So they might not give you an important market if you don't have the size and scale of experience of managing that market. So in those cases, you would generally see reward and recognition tends to be, commensurate to what actually can be achieved by that individual. And I think if I give you another example, just to clarify this, you look at Apple, which we've discussed as an example before. If you look at Apple, they have different products. You have the iWatch, iPhone, iPad, iMacs, and so on and so forth. Now, if we look at the incentives or the rewards which the iPhone vice president gets within the organization at the end of the year on achieving the goals would be different from the incentives or rewards which the iWatch vice president would get, or different from the iMac vice president would get, although they are all working for the same organization. The reason is that the volume at which and the profitability which is derived from each of these products would be different. So if I look at the volume of iPhones being sold, maybe 55, 60 million iPhones are sold every quarter. So you're looking at maybe 200 million phones being sold across the year. The profitability on the phone roughly tends to be, 70%. So because the margins and the revenue which the company will produce by sale of these, by selling them globally, would be higher than the volume and margins that the app company would receive by selling the iWatch or maybe the iMax or other products. So you would generally see that the rewards in this case and recognition which is set would be commensurate to the value or the revenue that you bring to the organization as far as goal setting is concerned. So here you're going to see different rewards and recognition for different sets of people, because the market are different, the market conditions are different, and the revenue that these individual business heads bring to the overall revenue of Apple is different. And that is where these priorities would be set accordingly when we look at fixing reward and recognition. Is that clear? Any questions on this so far?
Yes, sir.
Go on.
I wanted to ask about the behaviors aspect. How are they evaluated in the organization?
So when we talk about, behaviors in particular, behaviors and their evaluation within the organization would be through the route of what is called performance appraisals. So generally, when we look at, say, for example, when we are looking at putting or let's say equating behaviors and evaluation within the organization, we are going to be looking at maybe a different set of factors, which would be looking at, let's put it this way, intrinsic motivation factors or behavior related aspect, because that is individually driven. And when we look at so what was one you mentioned was individual behavior, and
yes,
what was the other part?
How is it assessed in an organization? Is there any template that a generic template that is developed, or it is company specific
For evaluating behaviors of individuals within the organization?
Yes, sir.
So how do we evaluate behaviors of individual? Evaluation of behaviors would typically be done through various performance management techniques. So let's look at evaluation of behaviors. Now, there are two aspects to the question. One, it is quite generic. Second aspect is if I equate behavior to motivation and the theory of motivation, then in those cases, it is still possible to look at studying the behavioral approaches of why individuals are showing this particular behavior while working within the organization. And they would be looking at expectancy theory, equity theory, or in some cases, looking at theories which are going to be, let's put it this way, individually looking at picking out reasons why the individuals show a particular reaction or behave in a particular way when faced with this situation. And that is where you are looking at studying it from a motivation point of view. And in those cases, you will study maybe or look at two theories, expectancy and equity theory. So essentially being, wherein employees are motivated because they want to see higher rewards. And in some cases, the equity theory of motivation, which is where the employees would essentially be, looking at, I would put it this way, what factors would the organization be providing, which means resources the organization would be providing. And these would be related to the Adams equity theory, because here the employees would be looking at, should I put in the time and effort? Is the inputs equal to the outputs? And that is where the behavior part of it would be looked at. So maybe some part of what you're asking would essentially come here, in terms of understanding the behavior of the individual within the organization. Now, is there a set framework? Is there a set pattern? That is the reason why you're studying these theories, is because you need to understand whether the individuals are, how an individual is motivated, and why the individual is demotivated in a particular role. And these are vital signs which the managers need to pick out and then put right, so that they are able to get the people working towards achieving the objectives. So I'm not too sure in terms of if there is a set model or a set framework through which I can pick this up. But generally speaking, you would be falling back to investigate and understand why is it that the individual is not engaging or not behaving in a particular way, given that the organization is providing most of the resources required by the individual to do a particular role or perform in that particular role. Is that okay? Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, there are lots of different aspects of how we can look at the evaluation. There is one such aspect of looking at cognitive evaluation theory, which is called the CET as well. And that is also sometimes what we look at in terms of, say, for example, if sometimes the organization looks at getting external consultants on to say, why is it that the turnover or the growth of the organization has become stagnant? So sometimes what will happen is that the organization will employ external consultants to come in, and they would want to do an evaluation to see what are the reasons why the expected behavioral outcomes are not being shown and leading to goals being achieved within the organization. And when they come in, they fall back into, again, different aspects of understanding behavior within the organization. And one such aspect they would look at would be through the cognitive evaluation theory. And this is a central theory in psychology, which basically, looks at explaining the effects of external consequences on internal motivation of an employee. Are there reasons why the employees are not motivated? And what are these reasons, whether they are intrinsic or extrinsic? But generally, they would look at the external events or external reasons which are, creating hindrances, and could be a reason why the employees are not performing or are not engaging in order to achieve some of these objectives. So I wouldn't say, any sort of a framework, but I would say this: there are these theories which are available, which sometimes are used in psychology to understand the very basic nature of human behavior and why they are behaving in a particular way in a situation. And that is what psychologists come in and understand. And then they try and decipher the reasons of why these behaviors are being shown, and how to mitigate or change this behavior is then done through the process of suggesting, change or bringing change into certain aspects of the job design. And in some cases, the job description for that individual. Maybe we also look at sometimes, if I've been doing a particular role, say for 10 years, and what I don't see at some stage is the growth in this role. The role has become a bit monotonous. I know ins and out of the role. It is not challenging enough for me. And if the organization fails to pick this up, what at some stage would happen is this will lead to a deterioration of my behavior in terms of engagement, in terms of relationship with other colleagues and employees in the organization. It will lead to a deterioration of me achieving the goals at some stage which are set, or targets which are set. And if these are picked up as signs to say that why the individual is drifting into this direction, then they would realize that the behaviors being shown are because the role has become stagnant. There is no growth or challenge which the role itself provides to the employee, and the employee has outgrown that particular role because of the experience and the achievement, or say, for example, because of the fact that the role in which the individual is performing exceedingly well. So in order to let's put it this way, in order to have the individual motivated enough to stay within the organization, what the organization would then do is essentially look at job rotation instead of job enrollment. Enlargement is, the organization would look at job rotation. That means they would give the individual a challenging role, which would mean that they will either move the individual into a different role altogether within the organization, give the individual a different type of role, and that would mean that because of challenges being faced or the skill set of the individual being realized in a new role would motivate the individual to stay, and obviously then start showing again the basic aspects of performance. And because the role is challenging, the individual will show a different behavior, and that is where HR tries to come in and mitigate this as a situation. And this generally happens in most organizations. If you are If you have been with an organization for a number of years, and you go to your HR or your supervisor and say, okay, I'm looking at a change of my job role, they would consider all these factors, and that is where the job rotation aspect of it comes in. In large organizations, to give you an example, you would generally see that when a job vacancy arises, the HR decides to post that on the intranet and allows employees from different departments to apply for that role. And the reason what they want to do is because they want people from within the organization to come into a newer role, because they're aware of the ethics, the requirements of working within the organization, and the basic culture. And that allows the HR and the individual to set quickly within a new role, start performing from day one, but also gives an opportunity to the individual to move from one department to the other, or from one job role to the other, and thereby staying or keep retaining the employee, but also allowing the employee to broaden his experience, and obviously, the contribution that the employee can make within the organization. And that is where, again, these are all evidences of how the organization would look at testing, or looking at the behavior of the individual and then rewarding the individual by allowing them to come into a different job role, which is through job rotation. Now, one of the most important things we want to look at in this particular part 2 of the learning outcome is to talk about what is called the job characteristic model. Now, when we talk about the job characteristic model, is this something that you've heard about? Anybody has heard about the job characteristic model? Any idea in terms of what is JCM? Okay. When we look at the aspect of, how to keep employees motivated within the organization, we are looking at considering what is called the job design, which is the most important. If you keep an individual bases the skills, the attitude, the experience they have, and you give them a suitable job, then you would generally see the individual performing well. He or she will achieve the goals, and at the end of the day, the organization will also hit its goals. Now, sometimes when you talk about the job description model, what you're looking at is this particular job characteristic model essentially was a model which was proposed and introduced by Richard Hackman and Greg Oldham. And this model, when they proposed, they looked at 5 core dimensions which can affect any individual's performance within a particular job role. So when we talk about these 5 core dimensions that they talked about or brought about, were basically going to affect the personal and work related outcomes, thereby leading to job satisfaction in that particular role. And these 5 core dimensions essentially which they introduced included or were essentially autonomy, feedback, skills variety, task identity, and task significance. Now, the reason why they essentially looked at, coming out with this model and the studies that they've done in the past, in the early 70s, was that they wanted to look at how individuals essentially behave and, take up a particular job role. Rather than looking at it as a job, they take it and embrace it as a particular part of their job, and then do it or commit to doing roles or activities essentially which will help increase productivity and efficiency for the organization. So what they essentially believed was that the implementation of these core 5 principles that we talk about in the job design, while creating the job design for the individual role, will increase not only the employee's work, but also, work satisfaction, but also include, an increased productivity for the organization. So the whole essence of job characteristic model and the 5 principles that they identified was to allow the job design to incorporate these 5 principles, thereby increasing employees' work satisfaction or job satisfaction in that role. And when we talk about these 5 elements or 5 principles that they looked at proposing, these can be used by managers to essentially identify who's the right fit in terms of the individual to take up a particular role. So when I look at skills, when I look at the task which is required to be done, when I look at the significance of that task for the organization and what autonomy is required in that role, along with the process of feedback, it would allow the managers to choose the right employees for that right role, which thereby allows the organization to achieve objectives and in the long run allows the individual to also have job satisfaction in that role. Now, these five core principles or elements are skill, variety, task identity. So what does that mean? When we look at giving or designing a particular job, you look at putting some attributes in that the person should come with this ability. So if I say that if I design a job description and in that, if I look at skills variety, I'm looking at putting skills related to academic side, past experience, knowledge of a particular type of software, and they are all being related to the skills of the individual that you're trying to get into this particular role, or shortlist candidates basis the skills. So for example, a bachelor's degree with 2:1, you're looking at a higher national diploma with merit or higher grade, you're looking at 3 to 5 years of work experience, working knowledge or experience of certain softwares like CRM or Salesforce, for example, or MS Office, or looking at email marketing, depending on the role's requirement. These are essentially talking about skills, and what you're trying to do is include this in the job description to ensure that right people are applying which have these skills required for them to be able to do the role. Now, when I talk about task identity, what we are looking at is we are essentially trying to refer to, let's put it this way, tasks which are going to be, I would say, defined in terms of output which the individual is expected to, provide in that particular role. So here we are going to be linking in, just for example's sake, as an organization, they would be looking at incorporating tasks which are clearly defining start and finish, for a particular, say, role or particular job which is required to be done in that role. And in order for the role to be completed, you would need to start at a particular place and then finish at a particular place. And that would mean that you would be meeting the requirements for that particular task. So here, an example would be that if we are looking at achieving a sales goal target of, say, £1 million in a year, then your task identity would refer to the fact that you are requiring your goal to be achieved, your task to be met. And that is by achieving sales of at least £1 million, not less. It can be more, but not less than what has been set as a target. In this case, they would want to take on and put the relevant requirements in the description to say candidates who have had similar experience of managing targets of £1 million or over annually should apply. So what they put is a basic minimum requirement for a particular task, and they would not want candidates who have handled sales targets of 200K, 300K, $500,000, or 750K, $750,000 to apply. No, they would want people to identify and only apply if they have achieved or have been responsible for achieving targets over the set criteria of £1 million in turnover or more would only apply. So here is where you would look at task identity. And because you're weeding out candidates which are not meeting that criteria, that would mean that here you are essentially ensuring that your shortlisting is by including task identity is ensuring that you're going to shortlist candidates which are going to be meeting that criteria. Then you have task significance. Now, this is the degree of importance of the role that you would organization. And in some cases, some of these roles which would require high degree of motivation or high degree of involvement or cross-working in terms of with various departments, which would require excellent communication skills, then in those cases, you would generally see rewards which are put in for this particular kind of role would also mean that if the employee is able to meet those task criteria, they're also going to be getting higher rewards than what the other counterparts would get doing similar roles, because their task in the achievement of that task in the overall scheme of things for the company is quite important. The portfolio, sometimes you say, they carry is very important, and that is why the task significance would also mean that when designing the job description, you are going to be ensuring that the significance of the job role is highlighted within some sort of a description or in a background provided when it is advertised for candidates to apply. Autonomy, which we have explained at some stage, organizations include autonomy because they would want the decision-making process to be independent. They would want the employee to be involved in that process. In those cases, what they do is they delegate or give away a part of the decision-making authority and add it or make it a part and parcel of the work or the job that they are, let's say the individual is taking up. Most important part is that when we talk about feedback here, the employees should have access to sufficient feedback regarding their performances. So at the end of the year, there should be proper review, monitoring mechanisms in place within the organization, which allow employees to assess whether they have achieved their target, whether they have met the performance as set by the management, and this will assist them in knowing what areas they need to improve on. And this tends to be a part of your performance appraisals. Now, there are different types we won't get into at this stage, but when you look at monitoring of performance and review of performance across the year, one of the key things that we look at is something called performance appraisals or PAs. Now, there are different types. There could be 360-degree performance appraisal. We look at balanced scorecard. We look at MBO, management by objectives. There are a lot of them, and they tend to be at different levels depending on where the employee sits, what role they carry, what part of management they are into, and they would then be used at appropriate levels across the year to be able to provide feedback to the employee to say whether you're meeting the criteria, whether you're meeting the goals. And if you're not meeting the goals, what are the gap areas which the appraisals, pick out, and then training and development is put into or is provided to the employees to help them better perform in their roles. Is that okay?
Yes,
Any
sir.
questions? Any questions on this?
No, sir.
Any questions, Hira or Faiz? Okay. Now, what I would want to also do is look at few implications of how motivation theories can be used to design reward and benefit packages within the organization. Now, I have got three of you on the session today. So could you think of what are the kind of incentives or reward packages which organizations put forward to their employees? What have you seen? Some of you have worked previously in organizations. So what kind of reward and benefit packages have you seen within the organizations? Any ideas?
So it can be bonus based, end of the month bonus on completing a certain task.
That's great. So one such type of reward or benefits packages that we see is that employees can get bonuses. What else can we think of? Any other ideas in terms of what kind of reward packages which the organizations or benefit packages, or sometimes we call them remuneration packages, which the organizations advertise along with the job role? So have we heard about things like incentives? Have we heard about things like bonuses? Obviously, you mentioned. Have we heard about things like holiday packages? Have we heard about cash rewards? Have we heard about referral awards? Have we heard about promotions? Have we also come across things like employee stock option plans, ESOPs as they are called? So if you are in a strategic role and you help achieve a market share or a profitability target or a revenue target, then sometimes people in the senior management or mid to senior management are rewarded by giving them shares in the organization, which are called ESOPs or employee stock option plans. Have you heard about reward packages, which would typically mean promotions? Because if you've been doing quite well in a particular role, then you're in line to get promoted, or you get additional responsibility, which is through job enlargement, and you sometimes also can be posted to a different territory on a promotion to say that, okay, now you are now, say for example, if you were a manager or an area manager, you become a regional sales manager, or you become a country manager, and that is where you would see a role enlargement happening, wherein a promotion along with the role enlargement which happens also gives you a rise in your salary or your pay package overall. So when we talk about rewards and benefit packages, we are looking at lots of these different types. You also have rewards and benefit packages in terms of training and development. Sometimes you would see senior management employees being sent across to executive study or undertake executive management programs. For example, they are normally sent to trainings in, say, for example, prestigious institutions, which could be looking at doing an executive management course in leadership, or C-level employees being asked to do a course across the year, which is sponsored by the company. So there could be packages or rewards, essentially benefits, essentially, which could be given as a part of a larger package of training and development as well, in order to keep them motivated and staying within the organization. So when we talk about different types of rewards and benefit packages, what we are looking at here is, depending on the process, content theories, and the need of the individual and the role at which role the individual plays and carries in the organization, you would generally see commensurate rewards and benefit packages being put in place to keep the individuals motivated to continue with the organization, be loyal with the organization, and in some cases, stay on with the organization to continue working in that role. So this is where we would look at different motivation theories. So we will look at total rewards. If I put it this way, they tend to be rewards which are looking at work-life balance. Simple thing could be a gym membership given by the company to all its employees, which is a part of your package. Dental insurance, private medical insurance being given, and these would fall into what are called total rewards, or packages or rewards which are a part of your overall package that you get from the organization in terms of remuneration or emoluments. When we look at equity theory, we are looking at motivational factors, which is again looking at the aspect of motivators and hygiene. So for example, sometimes you would generally see that, some employees in some professions are given cars or additional benefits, which is part and parcel of their daily role. So for example, if you're an area sales manager and you travel quite a lot, then in this case, sometimes companies will incentivize the employees by giving them a car, and that would be something which will be seen as an incentive or a reward, but actually is a part and parcel of their work role, because that is what would allow them to travel to different locations to be able to be in front of the customer, or be in certain places, because they have to be they're responsible for that territory. When we look at goal setting, essentially goal setting here, when we look at the goal setting theory, again going back to Locke's and Latham's model, wherein they would look at essentially the main motivators of why the individual would be focused on let's say doing their job, and they would look at the 5 principles, which will be looking at providing a challenge, or providing or seeing a commitment. So in this case, some of the rewards and packages that you would generally see would be specific to achieving a particular goal. And that could be that if this year, and they could include, for example, being given stocks, which the employees could divest in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years time, but that would allow them to see a larger reward being, perceived larger reward of being given, but their target that they are achieving, or the goal that they are set to achieve, will also happen over a period of time. So in those cases, you would generally see goal setting targets or goal setting theories, motivational theories would be used. And in this case, they will tie into specific rewards which the employees would get. So at a lower level, I'd be looking at total rewards. At the middle level, I would say, in a way, I can say I will be looking at equity theory, using the equity theory to basically look at putting rewards. And goal setting theory would be looking at market share targets, revenue targets, profitability targets, which will generally be achieved over a point in time would be used for goal setting, theories, and that is where I would be dipping into them to create reward and packages for the employees. Now, I don't know how many of you recall, but maybe a couple of years back, Elon Musk mentioned that if the share price of the Tesla Motors goes beyond 500, then he would want $1 billion, dollars in terms of his remuneration. Otherwise, he will just take $1 a month as a salary. And obviously, in the last few years, what we've seen is the share price of Tesla has gone up. And the board was quite rebuffed by the fact that this kind of a demand has been put. But later on, they realized that over a period of 5 years, if we were to give rewards and incentives to him, they would equate to almost being similar to what the demand is, and thereby keeping a challenge for him to say if the share price goes beyond a certain amount, he will only work on the company by taking $1 salary. But once the target is hit, he would be looking at in line to get $1 billion in terms of reward, and that would be a example of goal setting theory. Similar examples could be seen for Tim Cook in Apple, some of the other senior management employees. When you look at Google, when you look at Microsoft, people here at the top positions typically are led by rewards or packages are created primarily by looking at goal setting theory, in the sense that long-term goals of the organizations have to be achieved. And they could generally be in the case of profitability, market share, revenue, cost optimization, increase of productivity, launch of new products, or coming out something which is becoming a success coming out of the R&D and engineering side of things. And they would be the examples of how motivational theories could be used to create these packages and rewards for employees within the organization at different level. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, some of the bits that you say, flexible working hours, reimbursement in terms of fuel allowances and things like that would definitely be part and parcel of reward packages, and they would generally be, falling into what are called total rewards. Now, what we also want to look at is a part of this. When we look at the job characteristic model, we also want to look at what is the concept of empowerment and empowering people to be able to meet their high level needs. Now, because we look at Maslow's theory of hierarchy of needs, the 5 needs, the topmost being self-actualization and self-esteem, wherein people are generally interested in putting things into practice because they have had years of experience. What you're going to see is, in some places, empowerment works hand in hand by providing people with more autonomy and obviously more decision-making power in certain roles. Now, this is primarily done to help people by the organizations, essentially to help retain talent within the organization. Now, if I say that today, if one of the chief engineers is to leave an organization in Apple, or somebody who's responsible for design and development of certain types of products, if he or she decides to leave the organization, what you are going to see is a bit of a gap which will come in for a number of years before somebody comes in, settles, and starts redeploying the skills required to produce innovative products from the company. Now, if that kind of a talent is to leave the organization, or that kind of a resource is to leave the organization, the organization would be at a loss. So in order to stop drain of employees happening within the organization, in order to also limit employees leaving the organization, and reverse aspect of it is to build loyalty from employees towards the organization and the role they work in, you would generally see empowering and empowerment being the key principle which is used by HR in order to ensure that they are able to retain that talent within the organization. And empowering employees at a higher level is the key, because generally speaking, this is something that we hear, and some of you who have worked would also know that people, they are easier to replace at the junior level. Easier to replace, I would not say easier, but say harder to replace at the middle level, because they are the people which are well set within the organization, understand the culture, the work ethics, and understand the goals and how the goals are set for the organization to achieve those objectives. And if you lose people in the middle management, it's very difficult for them to replace them. And similarly, if you look at people in the senior management, you would generally see if they feel stagnated, if they feel that they are not being given sufficient, room to look at creativity or look at introducing things which would, or introducing change within the organization which would drive the organization to say a newer level in terms of achieving say for example targets or market share, then in those cases you would generally see that employees would end up leaving the organization. So here, when we talk about empowerment and we talk about allowing people to be able to be a part of the decision-making process, organizations would generally be looking at recognizing their higher needs. If we consider Maslow's theory of hierarchy, so here they would be focused on ensuring people who are in the middle to senior management, if they have self-esteem needs, if they have self-actualization needs or belonging needs, then this is where the overall process of the organization would be to look at empowering these people, because they would want to look at people in this mid to senior management, which are basically higher than which are basically people who are well set within the organization and are looking at moving to higher levels of responsibility. Then in this case, what you will generally see is that the organization would be looking at empowering them and allowing them to be a part and parcel of the decision-making criteria by delegating authority of decision-making to them. So here the employees will be taking part ownership of their work and also would be making decisions which will impact not just their job performance, but the performance of other colleagues or individuals within the organization. And this way, they would feel more empowered within the organization. So here, the organization looks at empowering and empowerment as a concept wherein it creates positive and a productive work environment that encourages employees to perform, and also when employees are performing, it leads to increased productivity and increased efficiency and higher employee engagement with the work that they are doing on a day-to-day basis. So this is an important concept of looking at motivating the employees by allowing them to get one clear, let's say, foothold within the decision-making process, and also empowering them to be able to make decisions which would be in favor, which they would be making in favor of the organization to make it more productive, more efficient, and drive higher performance within the organization. Is that okay? Any questions on this?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, last but not the least, we are looking at one of the last aspects of this particular learning outcome, which is basically looking at human motivation. Now, motivation we have discussed, but when we talk about human motivation, just as a concept itself, when we talk about human motivation, we want to understand what does this mean, and obviously related to the McClelland's theory, wherein he talks about, let's say a couple of factors, which is looking at, different types of motivations. Now, when we look at human motivation, this is a very complex field. What drives you? What motivates you? What helps you to do a particular work, or, makes you align with your goal, is something which is behavioral, psychological, it is personal, it is also affected by environmental factors, both internal and external. Now, sometimes you're in a good mood, as we say, and because you're in a good mood, you are, willing to cooperate, and you're willing to work, and you're willing to achieve. But if your personal factors or personal circumstances are affecting you and or are creating stress for you, then in those cases, the output of that individual in a role also gets affected. So here, when we talk about human behavior, we are looking at ensuring from an organizational perspective that the person working in a particular role is also personally stable, and is also having, let's put it this way, factors, personal factors are not affecting his professional judgment or professional work. So here, sometimes you would generally see, if, as an example, if I give you that, if you say, for example, had a loss or lost somebody in your family, your personal circumstances are such that they will interfere with your working within the organization because you are stressed, you are demotivated, or maybe you are going through a remorse phase, and that would mean that you are disengaged in terms of your work, or maybe not fully engaged with your work. So in this case, you would generally see HR managers within the organization picking this up and allowing you to take a couple of days off, or making it lighter for you to work at the workplace, thereby looking at one of the points which on this mentioned was, say, flexible hours of working that could be given to you because of your personal circumstances. And this is where the organization is accommodating and adjusting with you to go through that phase wherein you are personally affected. And in those cases, they would recognize that position or that situation and then do something to show their bit of cooperation so that you can go over that phase or go past that phase. We look at other factors, which could be environmental factors, external factors, which could be affecting you in terms of your working within the organization. The external factors could be that there is peer competition. And that peer competition is because maybe if you work within sales, as an example, one of the other territory is doing quite well, and the external factors are that obviously in that particular location, the market is booming, and the place where you are looking at managing goals and targets for the company, the market isn't doing quite well. So here the external factors are affecting your performance. And in those cases, again, the HR would normally step in and they'll say, okay, he's an ace performer. He generally is a star performer, but obviously because the market conditions are not good. So for example, when we look at Ukraine war and you look at, how the economy fared during the financial crisis, it was mostly everyone was affected, but developing countries or economies were able to quickly recover from these gains or losses, essentially because the growth potential in those markets is higher than the developed countries. So here, the HR steps in and recognizes that there is external factors affecting the particular climate in which the organization is operating. And in those cases, they would look at, valuing the employee and its performance, but at the same time, look at mitigating or, reducing some of the, let's say, targets, which would help keep the individual motivated, but also help the organization achieve a bare minimum with regards to the individual and with regards to, let's say, the market circumstances. And it is done primarily to ensure that they are keeping their employee and the workforce motivated and the employee and the workforce engaged, rather than, they give up and say, okay, no, this is not something that we can do or can happen, and they give up. And that would mean that the outcome could be totally different from what the company would anticipate if they let this situation go out of control. So in those cases, you would generally see environmental factors also affecting the way you work, or your motivation, essentially you being motivated essentially to achieve certain thing or certain targets for the organization. Now, there could be one other factor which we generally also consider, and that could be cultural factors. Now, cultural factors can also impact motivation. This could be because different cultures, people coming from different culture and different backgrounds would bring across different expectations, and that would also be creating conflicts maybe at the place of your work. Now, sometimes you would see in some cultures, there is very higher value put on teamwork and collaboration, while in some of the cultures which people come from, there is high value placed on individual contributions, because they would want to achieve something and they would want to keep recognition to themselves or keep the rewards to themselves. So you would generally see that in some cases, this also causes conflicts, and this can cause, people to behave in a different way. So when we look at the Asian cultures, it is mostly individually led. I'm not generalizing, but generally speaking, when we look at companies, because they are growing, the way rewards and incentives are set in most companies, especially in the sales, BD, networking, and account management areas, you would generally see they are individually led, because an individual's performance determines their ability to be able to achieve targets, and the more or the higher targets they achieve, they get higher or better rewards. But when we look at Western economies, in particular, European economies, you would generally see that here the focus is on teamwork and teamwork-related, contributions, because the growth as compared to Asian economies is slow or lower, and that is where the focus is more on teamwork and rather than individual-led contributions. Although there would be areas and fields in which this might not be totally true, but just to give you an example, this could be a fact wherein you would generally see in organizations wherein some functions are individually led, the goals are individually led, the rewards are given to only an individual which is achieving and completing the targets or achieving it. But in some cases, some goals and some rewards and benefits are primarily given to the team rather than an individual, and this is to keep the motivation, morale, and obviously the working structure within the organization going, because of the way people come from different cultures and different backgrounds. So motivation in general plays a very, very important role within the setup of an organization, because of the fact that you would generally see people showing a particular attitude or bring a particular, behave in a particular way in a situation, given a situation, and this would need to be understood and then interpreted and then rewarded in a certain way by the organization. And if you generally understand how to motivate people, you have the ability to be able to control them, make them work for you, or basically it can lead to what is called productive outcomes or higher efficiency within the organization. And a lot of research has been done in the case of studying motivation related to human behavior, what directs and channels such behavior, and then how this behavior can be maintained and continued within the organization in order for the organization to move from strength to strength. That means from increasing the turnover, gaining more market share, or increasing profitability. And then what motivation and motivational theories help to do is to understand what could be the factors which could affect the behavior of an individual. And in those cases, when it affects the behavior of an individual, the managers use different types of motivational theories to be able to put relevant rewards and benefits mechanisms in place to ensure that the organization is moving towards or the individuals are contributing towards the organization achieving its goals and objectives, which are set to be achieved at the end of the year. So this is where the concept of motivation becomes very, very important, and managers always try and understand the behavior, the attitude, the characteristics which the individuals bring to their role, and how to best balance those characteristics, behaviors, and attitudes using the motivational theories by creating rewards and benefits is the name of the game as far as motivation is concerned, or the working of motivation theories is concerned within the organization. Is that okay? So that kind of helps us summarize what we've studied in learning outcome 2. Any questions on this session today? Any questions or anything that you have not understood?
No, sir.
Any questions at your end, Hira? Any questions at your end, Faizan? Right, okay, that's great, no worries. So I will catch up with you next week with regards to the next learning outcome for this particular unit, and hopefully we'll be looking at completing learning outcome 3 on Saturday and learning outcome 4 on Sunday. So till then, I have uploaded some the types of motivation theories and a handout on that. So go through this that I've given, and apart from that, what I will do is catch up with you next week with the presentations on learning outcome 3 and 4.